for this next panel, which is entitled Sustainability in Sport, a Call to Action. It's in collaboration with GSIC, Global Sports Innovation Center by Microsoft. And here are our next group of speakers. It'd be lovely if you could give them a big warm welcome. First, we have Head of Unit, Physical Activity, Department of Health Promotion, Fiona. We also have a Global Digital Transformation Partnerships Director and Sports Industry Managing Director at Microsoft. My goodness, that is a long job title. Sebastian, Lancestremere. We have Sustainability Director at Formula E, Palle. And we have Senior Expert Football and Social Responsibility at UEFA, Filippo. Veglio. Guys, please come to the stage and we'll start this first panel. Here they are. Fiona's up first. Sebastian, Julia, and Filippo. And guiding the conversation, he's going to join me shortly here up at the podium, the Ambassador at Global Sports Innovation Center, powered by Microsoft, Francesco Anesi. Francesco, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot and welcome to this panel on sustainability, a call for action. This panel is brought to you, as it was said before, by GSIC, technically a collaborator of the World Football Summit, based in Madrid and in Singapore. I am the GSIC ambassador to Italy, but what is GSIC? GSIC is, as you can see right here, is the Global Sport Innovation Center powered by Microsoft. We are a non-for-profit organization that connects different players in the ecosystem in order to create value for the industry as a whole. We consider ourselves a global reference point for the sport tech community, and I consider GSIC to be a bridge between the innovation world and the sport world. But what's the plan of action for today? So the plan of action is, there is a plan of action, even though we need to be cautious, on planning too much. Let me first of all welcome your individual and your collective leadership today. The fact that you are here means that this topic, this theme of sustainability, has a significance and resonates to you. Giving you a few parameters, on the fact that basically sustainability, we will be adopting an open definition, multiple dimensions of sustainability will be explored. And today, as Isaac Newton said, we will be standing on the shoulder of giants, and our giants will be the speakers that you are having here today, leaders in the industry, in the field, in the institution. Our approach for the future will be a spirit of urgency. As Al Pacino said, in Any Given Sunday, in the motivational speech to the team, either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals. And that's very true, for sustainability as such. We are living in radical and revolutionary time, and if there is a lesson, to be learned from the pandemic, is, as Thomas Bach, the president of the International Olympic Committee, said, that we need more solidarity within society and among society. But what is sustainability? As you can see from the scheme here, sustainability is a working principle within the Olympic or the sport movement. There is a need, of an urgency, of achieving sustainability and sustainable development as the Olympic agenda suggests. But this is what I think represents today and the future dilemma that we're facing. There is crises that are multiple and exponential. So we had COVID, we had the recession, we had climate change, and sustainability is part of that. Are we starting from scratch? Not really. In the sense that if you look at the leadership of this organization, we can see different initiatives from the World Health Organization, Formula E, Strength Through Unity is probably a strategy that most of the people in this room are familiar with. Microsoft initiative, and one of the reasons why we're having this panel is the fact that we produce a small report on sport and innovation, a global social accelerator in the post-COVID world. What is said, I'm going to just focus on one sentence by Gabriela Ramos from UNESCO, is the fact that building forward better means investing more in sport, and doing so, mostly in sustainable way. We are moving fast, and we are moving fast in multiple directions. We will be having interdisciplinary dialogue, here today with the different speakers. Just 2 points on this slide. I mean, the fact that the European Commission is working with a working group on green sports in order to facilitate the dialogue at a European level. UNESCO has an initiative that is called Fit for Life. I think to a certain extent, when it comes to plans and maps, I mean, there is a map, I mean, in which we are navigating the subject of sustainability. We will be touching, to a certain extent, on the left part, I mean, of this image here, I mean, with the World Health Organization and with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So without further ado, I pass the ball gently, I mean, if I can, to Fiona Bull, asking her for her special perspective in terms of map, how we navigate, mostly looking at the social dimension of sustainability, because as the MC said, I mean, there are multiple dimensions, and the social should not be forgotten, I mean, and compromised vis-a-vis the environmental. So please, Fiona, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to everyone here this afternoon, and a pleasure to be here joining you. I think what unites us all on this agenda, of course, is the Sustainable Development Goals. All countries signed up to these back in 2015, and they set targets for 2030. We look as though it's going to be very hard to meet those goals, particularly because of the impact of COVID. But within that, and thank you for using Gro Harlem Brundtland's of the definition from the introduction, WHO looks at sustainability across all dimensions. Healthy people, healthy planet, living within our means. And healthy people is what you'd expect WHO to be focused on, in particular, and the relationship between the environment and people. And within that, it's perhaps appropriate, albeit after your lunch, to remind you of some very stark statistics. 3/4 of deaths are due to non-communicable diseases. That's the diseases like heart disease, diabetes, cancers, hypertension. But it's not inevitable, and many of them can be prevented. And just last week in New York at the United Nations General Assembly, heads of states met with the head of WHO, and they discussed this challenge, noting that 17 million of these are occurring under the age of 70, and they are deemed preventable. They are deemed preventable because it's through working on the risk factors, and I know you know them. They're tobacco, harmful use of alcohol, unhealthy diets, and physical inactivity. I'm very pleased to be here to echo and amplify the importance of sport and physical activity in contributing to that global challenge, which is central to sustainability. If we don't have healthy people, we don't have healthy employees. We don't have sports players nor spectators. We need healthy people because it's fundamental, and we can do better, and we need to do better. There's a call for investment, there's a call for action, which I hope we'll discuss. But delighted to be here, and I want to finish, Francesco, by reminding us that a paragraph of the UN Political Declaration included the contribution of sport to the SDGs. But I challenge us to live up to that paragraph of ambition.
It's a paragraph, it's a preamble, it's a beginning, and we need to bring it forward. We bring it forward also with a focus, I mean, more directly, I mean, into the football dimension. The audience here is all yours, I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, representing the football community at the highest European level. Strength through unity was mentioned. I was wondering, I mean, what are your maps, I mean, from a UEFA perspective, Filippo?
Thank you, Francesco. Good afternoon to everybody. A pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists and you, Francesco. Thank you very much to the organizers to have the possibility to share in sort of key messages our approach within UEFA. It looks very much in three words, three simple words: the role of football, the responsibility of football, but also the opportunity of football to contribute to societal well-being and to planetary well-being, as Fiona rightly said, healthy people on a healthy planet. Sustainability for us means respect for human rights and respect for the environment. So we anchor everything about this keyword of respect, which many of you might recognize from the many diffusions that we've had across many years on this topic. Strength through Unity is our brand, let's say, for the strategy, which is a football sustainability strategy looking between now and 2030. So a long-term investment that UEFA is making for the good of the game, for the good of its players, but also for the good of society and the environment. Within that, our mission is very clearly defined around inspiration, activation, and acceleration, much needed acceleration linked to urgency of collective action. UEFA has to do its part, and I'm not going to rattle off all of the things that we need to do and that we want to do, but every single actor within the wider football collaborative ecosystem needs to do its part. And so we want to inspire, we want to activate, and we want to accelerate the action. Action which we see in very simple words around 11 specific policies. 11 deliberately so to play to the football idea that we're working as a team, that there are 11 players on the field, 7 of them play in the human rights domain, 4 of them play in the environmental domain, but always very much imagining a sustainable future. That's what the strategy is supposed to do. What is a sustainable future looking like, and defining that towards 2030, and then working backwards from it to say, okay, how do we prepare for that? What are the specific actions today, the day after tomorrow, the next week, and the next months that lead to it? So 11 policies in 5 areas of action. And the last point, and then I'll pass back to you, Francesco, very much not just an ambition document, and I'm sure we all know them from all of our organizations, where you define a sustainable future and let it hang a little bit in the air about how you will get there. Our deliberate effort last year, and it took many weeks of negotiation, as you can imagine, was also to define specific targets and specific key performance indicators, so as not only to have a map, but also to have a very clear idea of how we're going to get to the end, or at least to a very good progress on that specific map. So dozens of targets backed by even more KPIs, but that's my last point. It's very much linked to the idea of transparency. Transparency in terms of how we perform, reporting back each year in standard operating procedures that many organizations, if not all, do, reporting back and being very honest about where we stand with regard to that effort. And again, reminding also ourselves that it's about ambition and about actions that go beyond incrementalism and nice initiatives. So with that said,
radical time, radical ambition, radicalism, I think, is what is informing, I mean, the willingness of everybody here. Also, I mean, from the perspective of a different sector, I mean, which is Formula E. Acceleration is, of course, a thing that comes to mind, I mean, when thinking about Formula E. But, I mean, saw your claim, accelerating sustainable human progress through the power of electric racing. So I was wondering, I mean, how are you dealing, I mean, with sustainability from your perspective, I mean, in this world?
Thank you very much, Francesco. Hi, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here as a sort of outsider sports discipline. So I think what is probably interesting for this audience here in the case of looking at motorsport and Formula E in particular is that Formula E is a sport that was created out of the purpose of advancing electrification. And sustainability is in the DNA of everything that we do. The sport is integral part of sustainability, and sustainability is integral part of the sport. So we've been lucky, I've been lucky to be able to operate in this very unique environment that has enabled to, since the very beginning and at the very top, have a vision where sustainability is clearly laid out, the vision, the mission, and the values. Now, how we brought it to life, certainly it's a journey, and that's the reality of sustainability in any organization. And probably what is most important in sport is that it's a journey because we engage with our stakeholders. And certainly, as it's been rightly explained, sustainability is not only the environmental perspective, it's also the social and the economic perspective. What is interesting in the case of Formula E is that we very much initially focused on an environmental strategy that then has been growing little by little as we were, let's say, growing and developing, because it's a sport that is only 8 years old, ultimately, adding the different layers. And why? Because we listen to stakeholders. What is also quite, I think, similar in the world of sport and of football and motorsport is the reality of the fact that we work in a very complex environment in terms of set of stakeholders. So our strategy has always started by engaging the different stakeholders that we had to understand what mattered to them, their needs and their expectations. Hence why we started focusing on the environmental impact of our events, really, and that's what we were discussing in the beginning, really being operational, making sure that our events were delivered in the most sustainable way possible, and also going through certifications. We were the first motorsport in the world to achieve ISO 20121 certification, which is basically the international standard for sustainability in events. And that's been very important for us because that's been the backbone of the development of our strategy around sustainability. And then we've been growing the scope to the social aspects. Again, I will come back if that's something that is relevant later on, but one of the specificities of our sport is that we race in the heart of cities. Hence, the impact that we have on community and the legacy opportunities are huge. So we want to make sure that there's a form of dialogue, acceptance, and of course that we leave a positive impact. And then what is probably the most exciting nowadays is that we work a lot with our racing teams and our partners and our suppliers. And this work is really kind of like what the expert would call the scope 3. So the scope 3 in an organization is basically the scope that you don't have under your control, it's only that you can influence. That's the most difficult bit. That's, in the case of my organization, over 95% of the carbon footprint, if we just look at the environmental parameter. But that's also the most exciting in terms of the opportunity to send a strong message, but the opportunity also to mediatize, to make it really kind of like strong and obvious in terms of collaborating with big brands, the likes of Microsoft being here on the panel, testify how important it is for those major players that really kind of like take sustainability credentials at the heart and the forefront of what they do. But also with the athletes, because that's really what fascinates, captivates the heart, the mind, and the souls of the people that follow our sport. And ultimately, I think that what is important is not so much what the sport as such is doing. We need to be leading by example, but that's the message that we send and really kind of like showcasing to our audiences, the millions of people that follow and are fascinated by the sport, that there's a more sustainable way of doing things and living their lives.
So to a certain extent, Sebastian, I'd like to take a step back, in this first round. Let us look, at Microsoft, let us look at a technology company. How does it look at the issue of sustainability?
Yes, certainly. So good afternoon, pleasure to be here as well. First of all, I think sustainability, in a simple word is, an umbrella for doing good. And that's really, really great. SDGs provide lots of clarity. And we've been working in multiple areas on the SDGs, in education, providing tools for millions of people, enterprise tools for free, teaching and helping teachers to get trained, upskilled with digital technologies. We've been working closely with unserved communities or, on accessibility communities. Imagine 20% of the global population has some sort of disability. So lots of work during the past years. But I want to touch a different angle, and I like the way that you showed before, the climate change, right? So that's, to me, really, really not only important but urgent. So every matter that we cover is really important. But if we want to have healthy people, we need to have also a healthy planet. We have seen, during vacations, the fires in Australia last year, in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, floods in Germany. So we can take a look at the glass half empty, or we can see also the glass half full with a number of initiatives that I'm going to talk about. So Microsoft has taken this very, very seriously and has pledged that we are going to be carbon negative, not neutral, negative by 2030. Most of the countries and companies are looking for a reduction of 50% by 2030. And I'm not saying this to show off, but if any company, if any country is able to make an extra effort, we should do it. We don't have much time, and the next decade is going to define the century, literally. So we're heavily investing on CO2 emissions to reduce that. We're going to be water negative by 2030, and also zero waste by that time. And by 2050, we have committed that all the CO2 emissions that we have generated since the foundation of the company in 1975, we're going to remove all of that. So as a tech company, we're leading by example, we're using technology, But also that is not enough. This is not a single player game. We need to work with multiple organizations, and we're providing technologies like Cloud for Sustainability solutions. And more important, not only the technology, but the learnings and knowledge sharing with the whole ecosystem.
Action, action, action. We are in the decade of action. I mean, let us focus. I mean, now let us go back. I mean, and take a focus. I mean, on, for example, I mean, the initiative that, in terms of health, I mean, are taken by the World Health Organization. I mean, I need to speed up. I mean, the discussion. I mean, but I think it's very important what the WHO, I mean, is doing in terms of GAPA. I mean, I think you will explain what it is. I mean, Fiona.
Yeah, well, look, thank you. And you mentioned and introduced the Global Action Plan on Physical Activity, and this has been WHO's response to ensuring that physical activity through all forms of movement, of course, sport, but walking and cycling to get to work, to get to school, active play and recreation. So whatever we call it, all our movement, we need to make sure that the opportunities, the environment support this for all people. The Global Action Plan, which Francesco, you called GAPA, not an easy name, but it is an abbreviation, it sets out 20 policies. And these are recommendations based on evidence that countries have used, and we're calling on all countries to implement. And countries agreed back in 2018 when it was launched to reach a target of 15% more activity. And that targets for all countries, and many have formally adopted it in their national health plans and policies. So what does it mean? It means that those 20 policies, some of which are data-based, we need to monitor and track, like Filippo, you said. We must have targets and track progress, but countries are not always measuring physical activity in children and adults. That's a gap. We need to fill it. But then we've got to provide the opportunities, and this is where it comes very close to home here, providing the programs, providing the opportunities in school and even preschool, and then all the way through. And many people who've heard me speak, I'll always talk about the people who don't get in the top team. They're not in the first 11. I'm worried and focused on the people who'd like to play, who don't get the opportunities. How can we all really make sure that every child has got the opportunity at whatever level of their ability and their interest to be active? That means providing more programs in schools and through sports clubs, etc. But it's also about the health system. And so we look to ourselves, we've got to recommend it. Recommend to patients with hypertension, with cardiovascular disease, with diabetes. It works. Being active, I mean, we all know it. We're all here talking about the value of it. It works. We need to convince all health systems to promote physical activity. So 20 policies, I can't go through each one of them today, but I do want to pick up on just two, if you'll allow me. One is using digital technologies and innovation. We are worried that the digital, where is my phone? Here it is. Will this accelerate or will it divide in terms of physical activity? I may be able to do yoga or swimming or Strava or whatever, but what about the affordable technology for everyone? Whether it's on a watch, whether it's on a wearable sensor. And what information is it giving me to encourage me to continue? Particularly if I'm older, particularly if I'm less fit. So I know this room is full of people with fantastic technology solutions, but I'd like to see them affordable and aimed at the people that we all know need it most. The second area, if you'll allow my last comment, and that is on the opportunities of mega sport events. And I take that term fairly loosely in the sense there's a very big one coming up. It starts in about a month's time, and WHO is very pleased to work with FIFA, Qatar, and the World Cup to look at the legacy. I want to go all the way down to every Saturday, every weeknight, the clubs in the communities, the events that you're running and putting on. So at all levels of sport, but the stadia and the infrastructure and systems, the ecosystem, is really powerful. But have we really captured that impact that it could have? Are we working together to target and reach the goals that we've set? We're looking to learn from Qatar, to transfer that on to future World Cups, different sports, and even multi-sports, and of course with the IOC and others. But mega events have got a lot of expectations set. It's in their legacy, it's in their sustainability plans, it's in the social part, but is it delivered in terms of more physical activity, more sports participation? And we're really interested in that and working with you all to see if we can both strengthen planning, delivery, and evaluation of targets in that regard.
The impact, grassroots dimension, but I mean, UEFA is also looking at those dimensions. I mean, but I was wondering specifically, I mean, in terms of sustainability. I mean, can you tell us something more about the action? I mean, Filippo, I mean, again, in terms of the things that you're doing, I mean, on a daily basis.
Yes, of course. We're very passionate about the actions. Let me be very clear. The strategy is a great document. I was telling Julia just before. It's maybe very nice to write and very motivating for a few months, but afterward it's really about translating that ambition into action. And the action, I really want to emphasize that, especially for the football crowd and the football community gathered here in Sevilla, is very much looking at football activities and their impact on society, and really keeping football at the center of all considerations. Of course, contributing to the wider sustainability frameworks, most notably the Paris Agreement, and of course the Sustainable Development Goals, and naturally national development plans, community development plans, that really put football at the center of it. So Francesco, let me just give you 3 specific examples, one on the environment, one on the social front, on the human rights front, and one on the, let's call it the rules of the game front. On the environmental front, as you know, each game, whether it's at grassroots level or at elite level, generates a certain amount of waste. Whether we want it or not, that's a reality. And you can go into different calculations, but it's several hundred grams per person on average at a large football game. And you start adding it up throughout the season, you start adding it up throughout the continent, throughout all of the competitions. And that's a significant impact that has to be mitigated, and of course, reduction measures have to be thought of. So what we, as governing body, come in and say, let's put an investment down to define what could be some guidelines to look at more circular economy models with regard to waste, in terms of how it's managed, how it's disposed, but also, of course, how it's generated in terms of behavior, spectator behavior and other behavior in the football community. In the previous panel on sustainability this morning, there was an allusion to this so-called 4R model, which is basically reduction, reuse, recycling, and recovering. We issued the guidelines just a couple of weeks ago, working, among other things, in partnership with PepsiCo, one of our commercial partners, who provided significant inputs at the level of their methodologies, at the level of their experience, at the level of their people expertise in that regard, but also with a significant, almost dozen clubs engaged in the UEFA Champions League of last season, alongside with the stadium venues. So it's really about looking at what kind of practices are out there, how can we optimize them, and what kind of guidelines can we draw to drive change across all of football, across all of the football pyramid. On the human rights front, a very concrete abuse element linking to digital, to what was being said about the digital reality of our world. As you know, we have challenges about hate speech, we have challenges about racism, we have challenges about discrimination. More and more, and I think it's hard to disagree with that, these challenges move also into the dark spaces of the online world. The dark because they are amplified, because they spread very fast, and they're very difficult to contain. As an organization, we decided to take a much more proactive stance as of this Women's Euro, the past Women's Euro that took place, the great Women's Euro that took place in England in July, and said we no longer can just be observing, taking measurements, and reporting back on the problem, basically describing the problem in a provocative way, but we have to move in proactively. We move in proactively at the level of awareness, at the level of education, and there's not enough time to go into that, but we also move in proactively, working with companies like Meta, like TikTok, like Twitter, to say how do we proactively now engage in removing certain content from these awful things that are posted online, that are really spreading like wildfire. So taking a very proactive approach, not just for one tournament, but kicking this work off in collaboration with Visa around the Women's Euro in England, but really doing it across the next 3 seasons, across all of men's and women's football major competitions that UEFA organizes. So it's really trying to move away from observation into very concrete action and very technical action also, because you're really intervening in an online space that still presents many, many challenges in terms of reaction and imposition of a certain goodwill to protect the game, to protect the players, but the officials. But of course, especially in a democratic context, we face also the challenges of where is the limit between free speech, freedom of expression, hateful. So we get very quickly into societal challenges. Very, very quickly, Francesco, rules of the game. The third example is how do we as UEFA set also and tweak particular rules of the game. What I mean rules of the game here is in particular the UEFA licensing criteria. Each club that wants to compete in a UEFA competition submits an application for a license, to have a license each season. There we managed to tweak, to insert and to inject also sustainability-focused aspects into the licensing process. So it's trying to go over and beyond the actions that are sort of taking on the specific pitch or of the pitch, but actually trying to look also at some of the rules that govern the game to really try to shift away from perhaps not optimal yet, but towards more sustainable behavior, towards the engagement of human resources, so the injection of human resources, the building of a community of sustainability managers across Europe, across the hundreds of clubs that have this license, and then build on that with concrete actions over and beyond what UEFA does in and of itself.
Julia, as a practitioner, I mean, how do you see community commitment and sustainability as such in terms of action?
I think today the rule is going to go by 3, so I'm also going to give 3 examples. So one thing that we were discussing again kind of like backstage is the fact that for me it's much more important, especially nowadays in the field of sustainability, to talk about how we deliver rather how much we pledge. So my philosophy with Formula E is that we basically celebrate what we achieve. So we were the first sport in the world to achieve net zero carbon since inception back in 2020, 10 years before what United Nations is asking and recommending. I mean, most of us as organizations and businesses and so on. And that's very important because it's not the end game. What is important, it was the result of 6 years of measurement, of reduction, and then ultimately of carbon offsets, because you can only be net zero ultimately if you use the offsets. I'm very curious to know more about how you reach the negative phase, actually. And what we also decided to do is, a year after, going beyond net zero, we were the first sport to align onto science-based targets. And that's a bit technical, but that basically means that by 2030, you reduce your CO2 emissions by 50%, which for an organization like us is a real challenge, because as I said before, 90% of our carbon footprint is in our scope 3, meaning in our logistics. So it's technically out of our control, but that's something that we need to really kind of like push forward, because that's really kind of like what is going to move the needle. And if we struggle with logistics, the likelihood of other sports in the world struggling with their own logistics traveling around the world is there. Now going on to the social side, we've basically been developing a partnership with UNICEF back in 2020. That's a global partnership with UNICEF working on all their climate-related work, and I know who is very involved in this piece of work. And the reason is that Formula E has been created to support the next generation in really finding solutions and finding a positive, basically, outlook at the future ahead of them. And we realized that the match with UNICEF was perfect because they had regrouped all their climate-related work under this fund that is called the Safe and Healthy Environment Fund. So the objective of this partnership, and what we delivered, as usual so far, is to impact 3 million children over 3 years in terms of empowerment in relation to climate change, better work and living conditions, work in school, living conditions in their daily lives, but also opportunity to learn how to lobby their governments. And over the course of the first year of the partnership, being impacted by COVID, unfortunately, we managed to impact positively over 700,000 children across the globe. So we are extremely proud of that and really grateful to work with UNICEF on this. And the last pillar is going back really to the heart of the sport and the work that we do with our racing teams. Again, the racing teams are the real stars, the athletes. That's what the people are fascinated about. So we are working with all the teams since many years through a working group that we've put in place with the equivalent of all the CEOs of the different racing teams. And what we've been putting in place is basically what I call a baseline, which is a high baseline of sustainability strategy that we have in common. That starts with them having to mandatory in the sporting regulations implement an environmental management system. We are lucky because our international federation, the FIA, has a bespoke environmental management system for all the motorsport entities. So they have to achieve the highest level of this environmental management system. And now we are growing the scope, getting them involved into gender-related projects with a program that is called Girls on Track. All the teams are involved in this because they are pushing forward their female personnel in the team, but also showcasing that motorsport is a welcoming environment for diverse and gender equality, topics.
Sebastian, I mean, I'm asking you to elaborate a little bit because you're closing, also this second round, and I was wondering what is the relationship, and Julia, would be definitely curious, to hear that, between Microsoft sustainability and sport, in particular, so going a level a little bit higher, in that sense.
Yeah, and let me, Francesco, answer the question with another question to the audience. Can you please raise your hand, those who have already a plan to reduce CO2 emissions within your company? Okay, probably like 30% or so. So a couple of things that we can do. The first thing is if you migrate to the cloud, you move your data centers on-prem to the cloud, you are reducing significantly the CO2 emissions because we are offsetting and we are reducing the consumption, the emissions that we generate in our cloud. Second thing is, as some of the colleagues mentioned before, we are using a standard in the industry which is record, report, and reduce, right? So we are providing cloud for sustainability, which is technology, solutions, dashboards, and insights from AI, from data. On the record side, it's very, very important to gather data from the buildings, the stadiums, the different systems, right, or devices to raise, for example, or increase the temperature or reduce it, or if people are going out, lights should be off. So it's very, very important to gather the data, and we have those connectors, those systems, to record. Then report, very important, the dashboards, insights for every single organization. In fact, some of the best practices that we put in place in 2014 is a carbon tax. So each one of our divisions within the company are motivated to improve their P&L by reducing the emissions because they are paying those internal taxes. On the contrary, those taxes are going to, for example, climate change, innovation funds, $1 billion that we're working on with partners. And finally, reduce, right? So once you understand what's going on, how you reduce that with, for example, these tools that I mentioned, but also more sophisticated tools in factories, in transportation, in cement facilities, or many other customers that we're working on, not only in sports, through digital twins, a virtual representation of the physical world, simulate, operate, and take decisions on how to reduce. So those are some examples on that. In sports, we have a great example of Formula E as a flagship story, Las Vegas Raiders. Bear in mind that 75% of all the emissions generated in sports, which are, to be fair, low, are generated during major events. So Las Vegas Raiders has a hosting facility for multiple events in Las Vegas, 40 million people attending there, so they are taking advantage of this type of technology, cloud for sustainability, and understanding what's their footprint and how to reduce that.
On innovation, I think I would have many questions on innovation. It was raised before. Is it accelerating, change in a positive or negative way? Is it decelerating, mobility? In terms of physical activity. I live two reference point. Of course, to take a look at the strategies of the different organizations is important because they detail, the action plan and tangible results. I mean, there was here at the Forum on Innovation organized by the World Football Summit, so it's clear publicity, I mean, on my side. I mean, Michele Uva, the director, I mean, at UEFA, I mean, for football and social responsibility, who looked at sustainability, innovation, and sport. Of course, I mean, I invite you all to take a look at the GSIC report, so, I mean, that's a clear hint, I mean, at that. And I was wondering, I mean, and we need to be quick, I mean, in this answer, I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, what are the key takeaways that you would like to leave, I mean, to an audience that is, to a certain extent, a very special audience in terms of impact, in terms of, you know, significance to society as such? Fiona, I mean, we start with you, I mean, with your, you know, it's not the global recommendation on physical, it's not GAPA, but what are your, I mean, takeaway from this session and for the audience for the future?
Yeah, well, thank you. My takeaway will be an invitation, and it's an invitation to everyone in this sport ecosystem to recognize that we know the problem. I think that's well known to us. I reminded you of the sort of health, social aspect dimension of this sustainability. We have solutions, but we have not shared enough those solutions. So my invitation is that I think there are many opportunities, many existing efforts and actions underway across the world, particularly across Europe, by sports, football clubs, and everyone in the ecosystem. We need to share them, because one regret will be is duplication and repetition of things that don't work. And yet we need to find and then scale the successes. Let's share successes. We often call that best practice, but it's learnings and lessons from sport, from football, in leaving a social health legacy.
Filippo, key takeaways.
Francesco, I'm trying to summarize because I know we're short of time. So I would argue provocatively that sustainability is a mega trend, and applying the principles of good management to a mega trend, you want to be anticipative rather than just on reactive mode all the time, because reactive mode will make you do things quickly, imperfectly, and randomly, to be a bit provocative on that side. So applying the principles of good management also means applying what we call the ROI mindset, the return on investment on the one side. So how can I really drive thinking on how I'm going to get a return for the investments I'm making today for a better today and an even better tomorrow. But also we position ROI also provocatively perhaps as a risk of inaction. What is it if I don't do anything? What is then the ROI, and how can I perhaps also find ways to quantify not doing anything as a decision, or not doing enough? How much will it cost me in the future? Lastly then, the investment side is then really to looking at elements like risk awareness and therefore also risk management, looking at mitigation actions, looking also importantly at adaptation, because unfortunately the megatrend is here and we'll have to adapt as well. Not everything will be able, even if we stop emitting today, the reality is the emissions are there already and there will be very little we can do about it. How do we then also drive more innovation, whereby sustainability and innovation are embedded as part of the same process and perhaps even teams in the future? And last and certainly not least, the measurement part of it. How do we get better at measuring so that we also take better decisions, again, on the principles of good management, good data to drive even better decisions in that regard? Those would be
key takeaways from a parallel to a parallel universe.
I'll be super quick. I think what is interesting here is to think about the Pareto law. So 80% of the impact, 20% of the impact. The power of sports, and again, all sport mixed, is not so much about what we can do about our own impacts in terms of the environmental or the social footprint. It's what we can inspire our fandom to do. And that's why the Pareto law is here. 80% of what we can do is inspiring these billions of people that follow sports, because they don't listen to science. It's not an accessible way. However, there are a captive audience that watch our sport, are being captivated by our athletes, and are being captivated by the simple messages that the sport can send. We need to be positive, we need to be solution-oriented, and I should dare say, I don't want to steal your thunder, that it's all about the technology. Technology is what will help us get through the challenge of climate change and placing people at the center.
Nice pass.
Yeah, so key takeaway, let me talk about half glass full. There is an important opportunity for everyone, whether you are a sports entity or a supplier or you are a sponsor and you're producing consumer goods and whatever. There is a $26 trillion opportunity that you can take advantage of. 86% of the consumers of the funds take a decision on whether they choose a brand or another one based on if that brand is a corporate social responsible brand. So include sustainability as part of your business and take advantage of your funds as ambassadors and make them participate in your goals, in your targets, and your delivery or execution of those plans.
We don't have time for the call for action. I think that the call for action echoed, what you said, right at the beginning. We're coming closely to an end. I think we reconcile different, interdisciplinary perspective, on the subject. We reconcile the different speakers. We need to reconcile science and action. We need to reconcile the planet and the people. I leave you, audience, to connect the dots. And let me just quote as a final point, a piece of poetry that was quoted by Amanda Gorman at the United Nations talking about environment, poverty, and sustainability. I dare you to shape your fate. Above all, I dare you to do good so that the world might be great. And with that, I conclude. I'm sorry I was brutal, radical. We're living radical times. I think it was important to make this call for action at the World Football Summit. I'm grateful, to the World Football Summit. I hope, we did not disappoint, but inspire you to take action. This is the direction. It could be a mega trend. It's interesting, to have this parallel conversation, between the different worlds. Technology could be an enabler, and health, the grassroots dimension, and learning the right lesson is fundamental for the future and for future generations. And with that, I hope we did not disappoint even, our MC.
Not at all. Francesco, if there's one panel I do not want to cut short, it is this panel. You know me, I'm part of your family here, I'm part of your team. But no, my very brief reflections to add to yours, I think sometimes when we're in this world, and I work in sustainability, as I mentioned before, sometimes it feels that you are there just kind of currando, you're just pushing hard, you're going every day, and sometimes you don't see the wins that you make. And I think to your point, actually, what you're saying, Fiona, we've got to celebrate our victories, we have to share our victories, because we are making progress. It might not seem it all the time, but we are. And I think that actually, do you know what? Just that whole idea of kind of community and trying to, all of us, I really like kind of putting good people together in sustainability. We've talked about this before, Julia. We have to make it cool. We have to make it accessible. We've got to make people who aren't in this group say, hey, I want to be part of that club. Yeah. So that's how I feel about it too. But listen, thank you so much. And Francesco, thank you very much indeed for chairing the discussion. Give it up for our speakers on the Sustainability and Sport panel, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Right, okay, we're taking a very different course now.